Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of How to Scale an Agency. I'm on with Mike Del Ponte. He's a 3X founder, VC, advisor to over $3 billion in total valuations. He had a company called Soma that was acquired, and he's now a CEO coach. Gives me kind of a similar vibe from looking at the things he's done as the $1 trillion coach. I forgot his name, but you probably know who I'm referring to, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Coach Campbell. He was the legend, and Eric Schmidt wrote a book about him called Trillion Dollar Coach, and he coached everyone from Steve Jobs to Eric Schmidt. And yeah, not the $1 trillion coach. He's definitely the king. But so happy to be here, Lucas, and talk to you
Yeah,
about SaaS startups and agencies and
right.
how to scale and leadership.
Fantastic. And so there's a lot of people who listen to this show who are majority agency owners, but a lot of them want to start their own SaaS companies or they already have their own SaaS products. And I would just like to know from you when the right time to start a SaaS company would be if you're an agency. Like if you're an agency owner and you know the objective is to transition to SaaS, do you think people should just start from day one, or do you think there's a time that probably is most optimal to start building something?
I actually have a coaching client that's in this exact spot today. We just got off a call like an hour ago, and I work with CEOs, mostly of venture-backed startups that are scaling really quickly, sometimes agencies. And
Right.
one of my clients, he's got an agency, very successful, and he has a SaaS idea. And he was asking me this question, like, when do I do it? And to be honest, I think it's a personal decision. There are
Right.
two ways to look at it. One would be, I'm going to validate this with some clients. I'm going to have them cash flow this, and I'm going to de-risk this thing. And if the SaaS isn't getting picked up by my clients, then I'm not going to scale this. The other is I'm going to finance it myself. I'm going to raise capital to do it. It's really up
Right.
to the founder's risk tolerance, how quickly he or she wants to grow it, and his level of conviction around this thing being successful.
Fantastic. And so can you give us a background on sort of like your story in terms of these companies that you've scaled that have been acquired? Like I feel as if I've actually heard of Soma from somewhere. What exactly did that do?
Yeah, so I've started three different companies. Soma's the
Yeah.
best well known. It started as a competitor to Brita water filters. If you remember Brita water filters,
Yeah.
this was the time when direct-to-consumer companies like Warby Parker and Birchbox were popping up.
Right.
And so all of us founders were looking for opportunities to disrupt these boring traditional CPG brands. And Brita was like the king. It's this product that 1 in 5 households have
Yeah.
in their refrigerator. It's ugly, doesn't work, and makes a lot of money. And we said, hey, what if we made it beautiful, sustainable, has a charitable aspect? We put a subscription on the filter and we sell it D2C. So just rethinking it from the ground up. Raised 10 million bucks for that. And it was the best of the times. It was the worst of times. And the reason why I say that is, it's important for founders to hear from other founders that no
Yeah.
matter, what you're going through, it's a roller coaster ride. I
Right.
now coach founder and CEOs. Every time I speak to them, one day it's the best day, the next day is the worst day. And so I went through that experience. I ended up hiring a coach to help me. Fortunately, we sold that business. And then since then, I've been advising and coaching startups. Now they're worth over $3 billion. And what I did, Lucas, this really applies to any CEO, whether you're running an agency or you're running a SaaS startup, is I looked at what makes a great CEO capable of scaling these businesses. And it came down to
Yeah.
three things. And I created a methodology around it called parabolic leadership. And now I help CEOs do that. And so that's a little bit about my story. And I do have founders that are running agencies, and I have helped companies that are building SaaS companies. And to be honest, I think it comes back to those like human elements of leadership.
Right. Right. Very interesting. So I actually think I've seen advertisements for Soma. When was that acquisition? Was that a couple of years ago or was that
That
recently?
was 2017. If you were on Facebook between 2015 and 2017, we probably spammed you with lots of ads. So you definitely saw it there. And you've probably seen it on someone's kitchen top
Yeah.
or fridge. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, okay. So then, but that's not a SaaS, right? So what got you into the SaaS space? And was there a SaaS company you started after that, or
Yeah.
what was the
Uh,
background there?
I wish it was SaaS. The margins would be a lot easier, and you don't have a supply chain around the globe like you do in
Right.
CPG. We did have a subscription, and subscriptions are incredible. So that was a little bit of an insight of dealing with things like lifetime value and churn,
Right.
and things are
Right.
really important to SaaS. But then after that, connecting with other founders that were building SaaS companies. And like I said, I think from a leader perspective, a lot of times it's around three things: vision, team, and resources. Great
Mm,
CEOs say no to everything else, and they focus on crafting, conveying, and confirming the vision, recruiting and supporting the best team, and bringing in the resources they need to fund
right.
this business. And so that's really how I've been supporting founders and CEOs in different categories.
So let's talk about fundraising because the thing about agency owners is that agency owners are kind of unique in a sense that they don't typically need money because they already have money. They're cash flowing. A lot of times, if they're successful, they're already making over six-figure salary. Plus, they have excess cash flow to put into investments like a SaaS product. When does it make sense for them to raise money on a product and either go VC or angel investor route? Since you are a VC yourself, you mentioned. So like when does that make sense versus just bootstrapping it and continue to scale through their own client base, maybe offering a solution to their own clients?
Yeah, I think it's important to consider money as time. How fast do you want to grow it? And so, if you want to hire a ton of engineers, if you want to hire a big sales team, if you just want to dominate the market and it's a land grab, raise some money. If you're more patient, if you have some unique competitive advantage where you can take that market share without having to raise money, you could bootstrap it. But typically,
Yeah.
the companies that really want to go fast, especially if it requires a lot of engineering, they're going to raise some capital.
I actually am curious too, like what metrics you might look at that would indicate someone should raise. Cause I know a lot of it's about, a lot of times that answer is, about patience and that. But I'm assuming when you're doing doing due diligence on companies before you guys invest, you're looking at different kinds of metrics to determine who's going to be getting money and who's not going to be getting money. We've actually created a set for ourselves if we end up going and raising, because we're kind of in that position I mentioned before where we don't really need to raise, but we might maybe one day. Some of the things that we come to for ourselves, just for our own like checks and balances to make sure we're not being overzealous if we do go raise money, is like if we have exhausted all acquisition channels that we are putting money into and we simply need more capital in order to really grow faster. Like our internal rate of growth is only a certain amount. It's not really growing faster than say 40% a quarter, right? Which would still be considered fast, but it's not like maybe lightning VC growth fast. Is there metrics where you look at a company, you say, wow, these are really good. These metrics are perfect. I would love to give this company some capital so I can then see them grow faster. Are there certain like numbers that you typically look at more than anything else?
Yeah, well, the scenario that you just mentioned is the perfect one. That's hey, we just need some more gas to pour on this fire, and so that is always the best time to raise. The worst time to raise, which is often, is hey, we need more staff, need more marketing dollars, we want to try something new. That is the reality a lot of times, but it's also adding a lot of risk to investors. So if you have really tight CAC to LTV ratios, if you're selling bulletproof annual contracts and that contract value is high and you're showing repeated month-over-month growth, that's a great indicator. And of course, it depends on stage. If you're really early and you don't have that traction, but you have an idea that a VC or an angel investor really believes in, you might not need that traction. You might just be able to pitch them on the grand vision. If you're
Mm-hmm.
later stage, you're definitely going to need that traction to get that investment.
That's interesting. And I'm curious too, like, what do you think of this whole no code movement and changing sort of the development, like who are building SaaS products that are building their apps with no code?
I love it.
And I'm just curious if you've seen it, you love it. So it's a good viable strategy for people when they're getting their MVPs built.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Cheaper, faster is better. So, at one point you may need to scrap that and build the code base from start. But, if you can do it with no code and go really fast and cheap, it's, unless you are really scaled, you're not going to run into many issues. And there's that famous saying by Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, like, if you're not embarrassed when you ship it, like you move too slow.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of people using no code, getting the prototype out there, building an MVP. And once it's validated and perhaps after raising some capital and really building out a world-class team,
Yeah.
then, redo it. But in the early days, yeah, just go fast.
So I think one thing that would help clarify when to raise money for agency owners who've launched a SaaS company would be understanding how much debt they should have versus their revenue growth every year. So for instance, I've heard some numbers float around on a podcast that I listen to, which is Nathan Lacka's podcast. I listen to his show a lot. And he mentions that from looking at the data, typically it's like the companies that can do like for every incremental dollar that they raise, they're adding an incremental dollar of revenue. And it's usually that steady growth throughout their scale. Is there a better metric or another metric that you look at in terms of how much somebody should raise versus how much revenues they should have? Is there a kind of a heuristic that you use for that?
I think the reality around, especially over the last 2 years, amounts raised, valuation, there's no science to it. I mean, we've seen
Yeah.
it all over the board. PitchBook has some great data sets on this. If anyone wants to understand what are average raise amounts and valuations, they have the best data on it. And so there's not a lot of science, to be honest. I think the way that founders and VCs both look at it is what's my ownership, right? And so a
Right.
founder is always protecting against dilution, and he or she should think about where they are, how much money they're going to have to raise in the future, and what their ownership is upon exit. And VCs are doing the exact same. They have a certain amount of ownership targets, and they want to know how much they're going to get in the first round they invest, how much they're going to get upon exit. And so typically when you look at discussions related to amount raised and valuation, it's more on that. And then the metrics are sometimes used to justify it.
Do you think that it's a good idea to raise right now? Or do you think that if founders should, if they, let's say there's an agency, they're starting to build their software, they're a bit into it and they're thinking, okay, I want to wait to raise when the markets are a little better so I could potentially get more capital? Or do you think now is a better time to do it because maybe VCs are looking for a better opportunity, and maybe because things are slowed down, there's a little more rationality around like the kind of bets to make, and maybe there's more synergy between the invested party and the investor, right? Like,
Yeah.
is it still a good time to raise right now, or what do you think?
I think so. I think you kind of hinted at some of the benefits. Number one is if you get capital now, there is a little bit of a vetting and a mark of, hey, you have something legit. If you would have raised 18 months ago, where anyone who said the words Web3 and NFT got capital, maybe that wasn't so wise. The valuations, they're depressed from all-time highs, but they're still higher than the historic. So I don't think it's a bad time at all to raise right now. The key thing, though, is for a founder, especially let's say you're an agency owner, you haven't raised before, you've got to understand the journey that you're starting. I mean, once you start on this path of raising, it's really hard. You're making a commitment, especially if you go with VCs, you have fiduciary responsibility to them. They have a path that makes sense for their business model. And I would highly recommend that anyone who is starting to raise capital goes online, finds a dilution calculator, and is realistic about how much to raise and how much dilution to give. You're almost always going to give away more than you anticipate. And one thing that I think is amazing about some agency owners and some bootstrap SaaS companies is they have a different mentality and they're able to build these awesome businesses without capital. And
Right.
a lot of times people think, oh, well, if I raise money, it's going to get easier. I think it's actually the opposite. You have more
Right.
pressure. Sure, you have more money, but you usually spend it pretty quickly, and then you have to raise more money. And
Yeah.
so it's not as rosy. The grass is always greener on the other side. I think funded founders always really admire bootstrap founders, and bootstrap founders are always thinking, man, I'd love to have that venture capital, but there are some downsides on both sides.
Very fair point. Do you think that agency owners should sell their agency if to fund a software product, or do you think that it should be something that if it's on autopilot and they've taken a management exit, they could probably still reap dividends from without having to sell it and then just focus all in on their software product? Do you think there's a rationale to both, or is there a binary option that you would recommend?
There's definitely a rationale to both, and it is a personal decision. My rule of thumb around exiting is there are two reasons why you should exit. Number one is you cannot do what you seek to do. Like you hit a roadblock
Yeah.
and you're just like, I just can't get to the next milestone, but I've got an exit here, so I'm gonna, pull off the road and just call it quits. The other would be if you personally are just done with it,
Yeah.
and that happens too, and that's fine. And
Right.
if you explore different options, and if you've got an acquirer that can take it to the next level, take it beyond where you can, then
Right.
that's totally fine.
And do you think that for agencies, this is something that they have at their fingertips a lot of times, and it's something that we're considering doing? And because they have access to capital a lot of the times, it does make a very compelling argument as to maybe doing a blended fundraising approach as opposed to just going straight to angels or VCs, which is most agencies that do pretty well have access to like government financing, like SBAs. Also, typically, there's all these new things popping up like Pipe or even Founder Path, which I use. Haven't got any money from them yet just because I haven't used it for that, but I use it for all the analytics and data. But they do give me offers all the time. Is it viable, do you think, for these agencies to do a blended fundraising model where they get a little bit from a credit card, a little bit from the government, a little bit from Piper Founder Path, a little bit from angels and VCs, a little bit from friends and family? Like, because they have options and it's not so binary for them, is there actually a benefit to just taking liquid or capital from multiple places?
There can be. The reasons why you wouldn't want to do that is if it conflicts with other capital sources. Like if you're going to take venture capital and a VC just says, hey, this is too messy. I don't like all this stuff. You've got your cap table looks messed up. You've got too much debt. Alternatively, if you go down the financing route with debt, you are going to have seniority on that debt. And so you bring in one form of debt and then it could block you from getting another form, or one of those two forms now goes junior to the other. And so you do have to be mindful of it. With that said, I love all of these new forms of financing. I think platforms like WeFunder, where they're doing community rounds. If you're an agency that has tons of clients, or if you're a SaaS business of tons of clients, and you can have your community fund it, either exclusively or alongside VCs, I think that's fantastic. I've seen startups that raise from Sand Hill Road, top tier investors. And then they say, oh, we're going to reserve $1 million for our customers. And they put it on WeFunder and it ends up being really successful. So I love that. I think that that is definitely the future and something that all founders should look into.
Well, you definitely give me some good ideas. I think I might actually think about that because that might be a better model for us than going full on angel or VC just because we do have so many people on the forum. But I am also interested too in understanding like, where do you think the future is right now in terms of opportunities? Let's put yourself in the shoes of like an agency owner. Do you see any opportunities for SaaS companies that maybe could be started in different spaces? If you have your finger on the pulse of digital marketing and you have a lot of clients that you could potentially solve problems for, is there anything you've seen that maybe could be an up and coming trend or maybe a good product to launch in the SaaS space?
Well, I have a few from my clients that I can't talk about that will be
Yeah.
launched that I'm pretty bullish on. But I actually think it's a great exercise for all agency owners to be constantly thinking about productization. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're offering these services. How do we productize it? You had a great episode. Was it with the founder of DashClicks?
Yeah, that was a really fun episode. Yeah.
That was awesome. He's great. I've never met him, but I love his story and I loved
Yeah,
how he
Chad
did
is
that,
super
right?
smart. Yeah.
He built this, he had a problem. He was solving it from a service perspective. He built the product and said, hey, instead of doing this for a few clients, let's do it for now tens of thousands of clients. So I think
Right.
it's wise to always be thinking about productization. And then, like I said earlier, if you can pilot it with a few customers to validate it. So before you even think about scaling it or raising capital for it, make sure that you do have product market fit. I think that that's really wise.
So that actually leads into my final question. Then I'm going to give you an opportunity to share kind of what you do and if best ways for people to get in touch with you. But my final question, and this is one that I have been hammering people on in my community and also myself because I want to get more knowledge on this, is what makes an incredible product? Now, you mentioned product market fit. I recently had a realization from listening to a podcast. I don't know if you've heard of Alex Hormozy, but he's gotten pretty popular nowadays.
Yep.
He had a recent episode where he talks about how product market fit is not just making money. It's actually when your retention and your virality is like so good and you're making money that you basically have built a superior product to everything else in the market. I've been able to get my businesses to millions of dollars in revenue, but I would honestly argue that they haven't found supreme product market fit. They've definitely found product market fit. But I don't think that anything I have built, because it hasn't cracked $2 million in revenue, it's pretty much plateaued around there. I would argue that I probably don't have product market fit because I'm not the best in the world at this thing yet. But if I
Mm-hmm.
can get my product to be the best in the world at a certain thing, I think that that's product market fit. I'm curious what your definition is. I think everyone has different definitions. So, what would you define product market fit as, and why is that help? Like, yeah, basically that. What would you define it as?
It's a great question because throughout my career, I've always, focused on that. And, Sean Ellis says he's got his survey when 40% of your customers say they'd be very disappointed if you took away the product. That's product market fit. Steve Blank many years ago said repeatable and scalable. If you, especially for SaaS businesses, if basically you got a machine humming and it's just working without you, whether it's sales teams or self-service, that's product market fit. I've also heard 3 metrics around product market fit would be NPS, retention rate, and LTV. So when you can look at this and you have super high NPS, really high LTV, and high retention rate, and high would depend on industry, that you could say, okay, we now have product market fit. I think that there's a qualitative aspect that you're talking about, like best in the world. Some people talk about the magic of a product, and the
Yeah.
classic example is Uber. Back in the day, the fact that you could pull out your phone and hit a button and a black car pulls up and you don't have to pull out cash, and
Yeah.
it's just a better experience. That was magical. The first time anyone used Uber, it was like, wow, that's crazy. And so
Yeah.
I think that there's that qualitative aspect that's important, and you either have it or you don't. I've
Right.
launched products that it just doesn't have it. It's not
Yeah.
magical. It's good. It might be great, but it's not magical. And then there have been others where it's just like people just say, yes, this is
Yeah.
amazing. And so that qualitative aspect is really important too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, the thing, the example of Uber is really telling though, because they were pretty much in a category of one. I mean, there was only one other alternative, which was Lyft, and it was not super hard to beat Lyft. I think Lyft has a lot of benefits as a company, but I definitely loved my experience originally with Uber. And whenever I was in a Lyft, I would be like, it's pretty cool, but it makes me feel really cool to be in an Uber, right? Which is definitely a really interesting appeal, at least psychologically. But yeah, I think that it's a good example, and trying to find those categories of one that you can be in, and nobody else can touch you there is always really fascinating.
Yes.
But thank you so much for being on the show. This has been really, really valuable. And there's a lot of people who listen. We have thousands of businesses now listen every month. There's probably going to be a few that will apply this to their SaaS product right away. So thank you for hopping on, man. Is there anything you want to share with the audience before we hop off here?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. This has been amazing. Really fun to share these insights. I think the last thing is don't overlook the fact that at the end of the day, businesses succeed or fail based off of leadership. You could have the
Yep.
best product. We've seen many companies that have the best product and they flame out. And so for me, my biggest passion is helping startup founders rapidly scale their businesses and avoid all the painful mistakes. And so if anyone's interested, you can find me at Mike Del Ponte pretty much everywhere. MikeDelPonte.co is my website. But I think if you're running an agency, if you're building a SaaS company, you can never overlook, or you can never overinvest in your own personal development.
And actually, I'll sneak in one last question here. Do you think that leadership is more valuable once you cross $10 million in revenue? Or do you think you need to focus more on product between 2 to 10, and then from 10 plus, it's more like leading a large organization? Because at that point, the product should be pretty established. Like you should already have raving fans and retention. And like, where do you think, I mean, I'm sure your leadership is always important, but like if you had to define it as stages, do you think it's equally important at the beginning, or do you think it's like more important as you get in the later stage?
Definitely after product market fit, when you're ready to scale, that's
Yeah.
where leadership is critical. At the beginning, you can fumble around and not have good leadership skills and, get your first customers, prove this thing out. But when you're ready to really scale, this is the thing that most people don't know is when you're a rapidly scaling startup founder, you have to reinvent yourself every 6 to 9 months. If you don't, your business is going to slow down or your board is going to find a new CEO because
Mhm.
you cannot be the bottleneck when you're scaling quickly. And so for startup founders, you always have to be building yourself faster than you're building the business.
I appreciate it, man. This has been really good. For everybody listening, Mike has been able to build and sell a business, Soma, and then now is a VC and has done incredible things in the venture space and SaaS space. And so I know I'll be re-listening to this episode multiple times, and I'm sure all you guys will too. So thanks, Mike, so much for being on the show. For everybody, this is another episode of How to Scale an Agency. Tune in next time. Thank you.